Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ancient History Jewelry Stories, your favorite niche history podcast about jewelry. 2 weeks ago, I posted a video episode of the podcast all about the history of tiaras, different kinds of tiaras, and the etiquette behind wearing them. I bitched and I moaned about how difficult and time-consuming it was to make a video episode and said that I probably wouldn't be doing it again soon. Well, what do you know? Here I am, recording another video episode of the podcast. If you are listening to the audio version of this, you can find the video format on YouTube, Spotify, and now TikTok, because I discovered that you can post videos up to 60 minutes over there. So if you would like to see this with visual references, and I do think you might like to, because this is a very good topic, you can head over to my YouTube channel, which is moonhoney.jewelry. You can check out the video feed on Spotify, or you can head over to my TikTok, which is also moonhoney.jewelry. If you are here for the first time, hello, thank you for joining. If you're wondering what the hell we're doing here, my name is Melise, and I am a goldsmith trained in ancient techniques. I make these podcasts along with a video series, which is also called Ancient History Jewelry Stories, where we examine history through the lens of jewelry. It is such a huge part of our shared cultural heritage, and it is one of the first things humans figured out how to do once they were no longer at risk of dying all the time. Actually, probably even before that. Although the name is Ancient History Jewelry Stories, and it started off as being primarily focused on ancient jewelry, I have broadened the scope to include pieces all the way up to the 20th and 21st centuries. Today, however, we're going to be tackling a topic that is truly ancient, some of the oldest and most significant finds from a culture that has often been referred to as the dawn of civilization. We are talking about Queen Pu-Abi and her beautiful treasures found in the Royal Cemetery of Ur. Before we get into the good stuff, let me get all the housekeeping out of the way. I made an announcement across most of my social media pages this past week that I was upping the game for my Patreon page. After a year and a half of making videos and a little over a year of making podcasts, it has become clear to me that I would love to continue doing this. I have said time and time again that this is not my job, but I would like it to be my job. It has become abundantly clear to me that I not only enjoy making this content, but that I would like to continue making it. And in order to do that in a sustainable way, well, unfortunately, like everyone else who toils under capitalism, I have to somehow generate income doing it. So if you have watched my videos and listened to my podcasts and you have found something of value in them and you would like to support me in continuing to make this content, perhaps you would like to join me on my Patreon. In the past, there has been a free tier and a paid $5 tier, and I have dangled the carrot of participating in polls to determine future podcast and video episodes to get people to come along for the ride. I have decided to create multiple different tiers for my Patreon along with many new benefits. I gave the tiers really fun names. There's the Chatelaine Society, the Historian's Lounge, the Collector's Cabinet, and the Curator's Circle. They still include the ability to vote in polls to determine the topic of future podcast and video episodes, but there are now fun and exciting new perks. Last episode, I started giving shoutouts at the ends of podcast episodes. That benefit will remain, and I'm also going to be doing monthly roundups of cool stuff that didn't make the cut for content, more information about the stuff that did make the cut for content, monthly recaps of all of the crazy and amazing vintage garments that I like to wear in my videos, monthly Q&A sessions, for some tiers, the ability to request custom content, which is a big move for me because I have said in the past that I do not take requests, as well as the ability to have me do a deep dive on your own personal jewelry. The personal jewelry deep dive is also available as a standalone purchase on my Patreon if you don't want to commit to a membership, but you do want me to have a look at a piece from your own collection. So if that is enticing to you and you'd like to support me in this crazy glittery jewelry adventure, you can head over to patreon.com/ancienthistoryjewelrystories. And for those of you who are already giving me your hard-earned money once a month on Patreon, I love you dearly. I will be giving you a shout out at the end of the episode. As usual, if you would like to see the short-form videos that I post 3 to 5 times a week, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube under the username moonhoney.jewelry. I am also now uploading my content to Facebook. You can find me there at moonhoneyjewelry. And if you'd like to see my own work, the jewelry that I make, using mostly ancient techniques and always inspired by historical jewelry, you can find that at shopmoonhoney.com. I have also made a whole bunch of new merch for the podcast and the video series, including some tote bag ideas that had been rolling around in my head for a very long time. I have a fantastic tote bag that says everyone's favorite kleptomaniac trendsetter with a portrait of Queen Victoria, and one with Josephine de Beauharnais that says the best thing Napoleon ever did was buy Josephine all that jewelry. I have some classics as well, like the Victorian-era Chaos Goblin Heinrich Schliemann tote bag, and the That Asshole Christopher Columbus tote bag, which is a fan favorite. If you want to see those, you can head over to shopmoonhoney.com and navigate to the Ancient History Jewelry Story section, where you will see a link to all of the merch. Okay, enough boring stuff. Time to get into the good stuff. I have covered Queen Pu-Abi's grave goods in a few previous videos, but those were over a year ago, and a year is basically a century in internet time. I think I am better equipped to talk about these now, and I think there are a lot of really interesting things to learn, not only from Queen Pu-Abi and her burial, but how her artifacts were treated after they were discovered. We are going all the way back to circa 2550 BCE in what is now modern-day Iraq. Hi, it's me, coming in to make a correction. You're gonna hear me chiming in with a few little corrections and additional bits of info because I made a few mistakes throughout this episode. First and foremost, I spent the first half of the episode calling him Leonard Woolsey. It's Leonard Woolley. I don't know why I found it so tempting to drop that extra S in there, but I apologize for the mistake. Woolsey is incorrect, Woolley is correct. Initially discovered by British archaeologist Leonard Woolsey in the early 1920s, the Royal Cemetery of Ur was an ancient Sumerian cemetery that held a few notable and royal tombs, but mostly held common graves. The Royal Cemetery is a bit of a misnomer, but it has stuck. Excavated between 1922 and 1934 in a joint effort between the British Museum and the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, the most notable find in the cemetery was the tomb of a woman that we now know as Pu-Abi. Initially, Pu-Abi's name was thought to be Shubad or Shudiad, as Leonard Woolsey originally read the cuneiform on her seals in Sumerian, when we now know that it was meant to be read in Akkadian. The Sumerians and Akkadians were two different cultural groups in ancient Mesopotamia. Although the city of Ur is Sumerian, it is believed that Pu-Abi herself was Akkadian. And for a woman from a neighboring culture to have so much influence in the Sumerian world is pretty intriguing. Pu-Abi is often referred to as a queen, although her status is greatly debated. We are not entirely sure if she held the role of queen or priestess or perhaps both. What we do know is that the seals found in her tomb and on her body bear the word Nin or Eresh, the Sumerian and Akkadian words for queen, priestess, great lady, or goddess. It is entirely possible that she was both a ruler and a priestess. Interestingly, there is no mention of a husband or a king anywhere in her tomb, which has led some archaeologists to posit the idea that she ruled in her own right. Pu-Abi is thought to have been 40 years old and about 5 feet tall. Her tomb was found along with 1,800 graves in the Royal Cemetery of Ur, and the most remarkable thing about it is that it was found completely untouched. Much like the tomb of King Tutankhamun in Egypt, Queen Pu-Abi's tomb was not looted, and this is mostly because so many graves were built on top of existing graves in the cemetery that nobody had found it until the 1920s. Pu-Abi herself was found richly covered in adornments. She was found wearing an elaborate headdress composed of multiple parts, large earrings, gold ribbons in her hair rings, multiple necklaces. She was surrounded by costly and beautifully made beads. She had 2 belts and multiple rings. She was also not found alone. In her burial chamber, she was found with 3 women who were believed to be her attendants. They are also adorned in similar headdresses and jewelry, although far less than Queen Pu-Abi. I think I do need to take a moment to let everyone know that I am going to be showing you images of human remains. They are over 4,000 years old, but as the world is sliding into a neo-colonial hellscape in front of our very eyes, I think a lot of people are at their limit and probably don't want to see any skulls, even if they are almost 5,000 years old. So be aware that I'm going to be talking about death and I'm going to be showing you images of human remains. Okay, disclaimer done. Pu-Abi's grave was surrounded by what Leonard Woolsey referred to as death pits, a very evocative term. The largest of these so-called death pits held the remains of 74 people. 6 men and 68 women. All of them were adorned with some kind of gold, silver, and lapis lazuli decoration. It is unclear how many of these so-called death pits are actually associated with Queen Pu-Abi. Leonard Woolsey made a lot of assumptions, which we're going to be discussing in a little bit, but it's not unfair to assume that at least some of the remains found near her grave have something to do with her burial. especially considering that many of the adornments are nearly identical to the ones found on Queen Pu-Abi's body and the bodies of her 3 attendants. Within this larger death pit, one woman seems to be more adorned than the others, and 52 of the human remains found within seem to have been her own attendants. She was found with servants, guards, lions, horses, a chariot, and several more people suspected to have been her retainers. Quick note, I was unable to find any real concrete information about this one woman who was more richly adorned, and it is also vague and unclear if the attendants were for this one woman or if they were all Pu-Abi's attendants. There is yet another death pit found above Queen Pu-Abi's chamber, which contains 21 people, but this is the most contested of all of the death pits. In this case in particular, it seems unclear whether or not these burials have anything to do with Queen Pu-Abi. There has been a lot of speculation about the cause of death of all of the people found in these surrounding death pits. Of course, having this many people buried in one place means that they either took their own lives or they were killed. In Queen Pu-Abi's burial, it seems that it may have been a case of both. There is evidence of blunt force trauma, as is seen in these 2 crushed skulls, one of a man and one of a woman. Okay, quick break. I realized while editing this that I did not adequately explain that these skulls were not crushed only by the blunt force trauma that most likely killed them. All of Pu-Abi's grave and some of the surrounding death pits had been basically caved in. So yes, there is evidence of blunt force trauma, but these skulls are flattened not because someone hit them in the head, but because an entire roof basically collapsed on them. But many of the remains found don't show any evidence of violence, leading to the speculation that they may have been poisoned or may have poisoned themselves. The blunt force trauma seems to have been reserved for those that were not killed by the poison. Perhaps because the dose was not high enough, or for whatever reason, they simply were resistant to it. The chamber that Queen Pu-Abi was found in contained much more than just the jewelry that she and her attendants were wearing. It also included a large and elaborate lyre decorated with a bearded bull's head adorned with gold and lapis lazuli, gold tableware, a chariot adorned with silver lioness heads, and an abundance of silver, gold, and lapis bracelets and rings. Her grave chamber also contained textiles. These had been reduced to dust over time, but because the remains were undisturbed, it was possible for Leonard Woolley and the other archaeologists on the excavation to determine the weave patterns that had been used to make the textiles. I did mention that the initial excavation was a joint effort between the British Museum and the Penn Museum, which notably excludes anything having to do with Iraq. Of course, you are probably wondering where all of these artifacts ended up. If you've been to the Penn Museum in Philadelphia, then you know that they have a large number of the most important pieces found at the excavation, but quite a few of them did end up in London. Of course, our favorite mustache-twirling villain of a museum, the British Museum, has quite a few of the pieces in their collection, and Pu-Abi's actual remains, including fragments of her badly damaged skull, are at the Natural History Museum in London. Some of the artifacts did end up in the National Museum in Baghdad in Iraq, which is where they belong, but unfortunately, a number of them were also stolen in 2003 during the Iraq War. This, of course, is exactly the sort of thing that muddies the conversation about repatriation, where people hold up instances like this and say, this is why we can't return cultural goods to their countries of origin. They're going to get lost, they're going to get damaged, they're going to get stolen. That's a broader topic, but I definitely hate the paternalistic, colonial attitude that certain countries have taken in determining whether or not some countries should be allowed to have the care of their own cultural artifacts. I will say, to the Penn Museum's credit, they have done an exceptional job documenting everything that has been done to and with these artifacts since they were brought to the museum. I don't think I've ever seen such a cohesive timeline, complete with images, in any museum's digital collections. And that brings me to my next topic. Thanks to the Penn Museum documenting these pieces over the course of the last century, we can actually examine how these pieces have been displayed and how our understanding of them has changed over time, leading to multiple changes in how Queen Pu-Abi's burial goods have been shown to the public. One of the most notable examples is a piece that was once referred to as Queen Pu-Abi's diadem. This was initially found next to her body, a profusion of incredibly finely made lapis beads, complete with beautifully rendered teeny tiny pendants. The pendants show a variety of fruits such as apples, plants, and gorgeous little animals. There are stags, there are rams, there are bulls. The pendants are made out of gold over a core of what the Penn Museum lists as bitumen, ? Bitumen is used as an adhesive in asphalt. It is a sticky, tar-like substance that is naturally occurring and probably would have lended itself well to filling out these hollow forms. Something similar is still practiced in modern jewelry, where hollow gold and silver forms are filled with shellac or resin. Initially, Leonard Woolley had assumed that all of these lapis beads and beautiful little pendants were meant to comprise one diadem. For over 80 years, this was displayed as beads and pendants sewn onto a broad cloth. Nobody questioned whether or not this was accurate for 8 decades. It was originally put together this way for the British Museum's exposition of the archaeological finds in the 1920s, and it remained that way until the end of the 20th century. It wasn't until the late 1990s, when the Penn Museum was preparing all of these artifacts to go on a touring exhibition, that they decided to re-examine this so-called diadem. It was eventually discovered that this was not a diadem at all. As you can see in the way that it is currently displayed, this is multiple pieces. Yes, they were definitely intended to go together. They are closely related, but they were not meant to comprise one piece. They were probably not meant to be worn as diadems at all, but varying necklaces. In its initial presentation as a single diadem, the iconography was completely jumbled and didn't make any sense. But nobody had thought to look twice. Everybody just trusted that Leonard Woolley knew what he was talking about, which I think is a trap that we fall into very often when we know that someone has expertise and knowledge beyond our own. Unfortunately, because Queen Pu-Abi's finds were so unlike anything that had been found before, he was pulling a lot of this out of his ass. Which brings me to the next major change in the way that Queen Pu-Abi's goods have been shown to the world since the 1920s. One of the archaeologists that was on the initial excavation with Leonard Woolley was his wife Catherine. She was responsible for all of the incredibly detailed drawings and diagrams of the burial site. And she was also responsible for one of the initial representations of what Queen Pu-Abi was thought to look like. I always feel jump scared by this thing. It freaks me the hell out. I hate looking at this mannequin, but I have to show it to you because it's an important part of the history of these finds. This is the mannequin that Queen Pu-Abi's headdress and jewelry was first exhibited on at the Penn Museum, and I hate it. Catherine Woolley, along with one of the directors of the museum, based this representation on a statue that was made over 500 years after Queen Pu-Abi's death. The statue is at the Louvre Museum in Paris and is known as La Femme à l'écharpe. I definitely butchered that, but it means woman with shawl. They struggled to create an accurate depiction and made many assumptions because there was a real lack of understanding of female aesthetics in ancient Mesopotamia at the time. They even decided to give her makeup, even though there were no real grounds for including it. This representation caused quite a bit of controversy, and eventually it was replaced with a faceless mannequin. It did go through some different permutations over time, though. As you can see, they maintained a lot of the features that had been cribbed from this statue that was made 500 years later, including the eyebrows that meet in the middle, and it's entirely impossible to say if this has any bearing on what Queen Pu-Abi would have actually looked like during her lifetime. I will admit that the faceless mannequin is also creepy, but it is nowhere near as horrifying as the original. Because the Penn Museum has so many incredible images of these pieces over time, you can see just how often they revisited their idea of how this headdress would have been worn. The hair ribbons, in particular, have been arranged many different ways in the last century. And you would think, a headdress, that's pretty straightforward, but this headdress is composed of many pieces, which is part of what makes it so difficult to know exactly how it would have been worn. And chances are, if this was worn during Queen Pu-Abi's lifetime, it probably looked a little different every time she wore it. There is a photo of the headdress as it was found in situ, although as you can see, it's not in great shape, and you have to extrapolate quite a bit based on this. The headdress consists of 4 wreaths. 2 of them are nearly identical. They have gold poplar leaves, separated by lapis and carnelian beads. There is a 3rd wreath, which is a bit more elaborate. This one includes flowers made out of lapis and agate, willow leaves, which are made out of multiple pieces, unlike the poplar leaves. Then there is what is referred to as a frontlet. This does not go all the way around the head, but it's made out of interlocking circles with a gold band around the top. Chiming in again because those circles do not interlock. I said this about the frontlet, and I will say it later in the episode about her belt. Those are not interlocking circles, they are just individual circles. Then there is a support comb in the back, which is very similar to a Spanish peinada or mantilla comb. This would have stuck straight up and added almost a foot to Pu-Abi's height. It's made out of a single sheet of gold, and it separates into 7 prongs, which hold some beautiful rosettes. The rosettes have lapis centers with gold cups over them. Then we have the gold ribbons. These may look simple, but they're a testament to the craftsmanship that went into these pieces. And some of them are pretty long, up to 36 feet, and they are perfectly straight. It's theorized that the perfection of these ribbons show craftsmanship being used as an act of devotion. Almost every piece of Queen Pu-Abi's headdress, as well as the other adornments she was found with, hint to ritualistic and religious purposes. These perfectly straight gold ribbons, which would have been hammered by hand, are an act of religious devotion. She was also found with hair rings and earrings. These are a crescent moon shape and are thought to have been associated with the moon goddess Nana. Boy, I made a lot of mistakes in this one. Nana was a moon god, not a goddess, also known as Sin. As you can see in the goods found with her attendants, their headdresses are remarkably similar. Some of the many human remains that were found in the surrounding death pits also have silver hair ribbons. In fact, quite a bit of silver was found in both Pu-Abi's grave and the surrounding death pits. A real rarity because silver does not survive the ravages of time the way that gold does. All of the gold used for Pu-Abi's headdress and jewelry is what's known as native gold, or electrum. This is a naturally occurring gold alloy, usually has a bit of copper and silver in there, in different proportions, and the gold has been tested at ranging between 70 and 90% pure. And for reference, 18 karat gold is 75% pure gold. As I mentioned before, Pu-Abi was also found surrounded by thousands of lapis, carnelian, gold, and silver beads. These were initially described as being laid out in rows and looking as though they were initially sewn onto a cloak or worn as a cape. I don't think there was any evidence of them actually having been sewn onto any textiles, so they are now strung in over 80 strands in the form of a cape. I did also mention that she was wearing 2 belts, one made out of lapis, carnelian, and gold beads, and one of interlocking gold circles, which may have been worn a little bit lower down on her hips. While the gold probably came from pretty close by, the lapis and carnelian show just how much trade was being done with ore. The lapis would have come from what is now Afghanistan, and the carnelian would have come from what is now India and Pakistan. While we don't know very much about Queen Pu-Abi, and the discovery of her tomb has posed more questions than it has ever answered, it is remarkable that we have such a wealth of artifacts attributed to one woman. Clearly, she was important, because you don't just kill dozens of people and bury them with someone for nothing. And the fact that no husband was ever mentioned anywhere in her grave says a lot about how powerful she must have been. Pu-Abi was certainly a very important figure during her time. I have not made it to the Penn Museum to see these artifacts with my own eyes, but I do hope to make a trip in the near future so that I can check these pieces out myself. I think it is incredible that the Penn Museum has gone back and re-examined how these pieces are displayed, how they might have been worn, and the context in which they were found multiple times in the last century. Sure, it took 80 years to take another look at how Leonard Woolley decided this diadem should have been put together, but the fact is that they did, and we have a better idea of how this might have been worn, which leads to a deeper understanding of ancient Mesopotamian culture, and specifically Queen Pu-Abi. If you have been to the Penn Museum and you've seen these beautiful pieces yourself, leave me a comment and let me know what you thought. I'd love to know what your favorite pieces were, and if that faceless mannequin creeped you out the way it creeps me out. Although it is less known today than King Tutankhamun's tomb, which was found just a few years before Queen Pu-Abi, it seems that she did make quite a splash when she was first discovered in the 1920s. Though, of course, she was still being referred to as Shubad. That's everything I can tell you about Pu-Abi and her incredible grave goods. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating and a review, but only if it's positive. Otherwise, keep it to yourself. Consider subscribing, and if you just can't get enough of ancient history jewelry stories, take a look at my Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/ancienthistoryjewelrystories. I gave you the whole spiel already, but I am very excited to have another space where we can get deeper into the weeds with these beautiful ancient jewels, and slightly more modern ones, and continue the conversations that these incredible pieces spark. Clearly, I'm not the only one who's obsessed with this stuff. If you want to watch my other videos, find me on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram under moonhoney.jewelry, find me on Facebook at moonhoneyjewelry, and check out the jewelry that I make at shopmoonhoney.com. If you head over to the Ancient History Jewelry Stories page on my website, you can have a look at all of the new merch. And now we get to the part where I make uncomfortable eye contact with the camera while I shout out my paid Patreon subscribers. I love you guys. Thank you for choosing to support me. A huge thank you to Rivka McCormack, Dilara Öskardeshler, Kate, Deborah Hansen, Armored Chocobo, I'm a Final Fantasy fan too, Jennifer Moshier, Julie Spradley, Emma J. Makes, Mary Lee, Flying Chef, Liz Bouchette, Aaron Atkinson, Michelle Dunphy, Bree S., Connor, Magda Chope, Catherine Elizabeth, Beth, Stannis Fluoride, Megan Rose Thomas, Mimi Fondren, Bonnie Glass, Colsey Tucker, Mink Rose, Jennifer Crosscree, Amy Radner, and Jennifer Baker. If I've pronounced any of your names wrong, please let me know on Patreon. I know I hate it when people pronounce my name wrong. And once again, thank you for listening and watching. Thank you for being here, and I'll be back in 2 weeks for more ancient history jewelry stories.